All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And I am back again with Dave Maconi. Dave, how are you doing?
Good, man. Still waking up. How you doing?
Not too bad. This is my favorite time of the year, actually, when the autumn period kind of starts and it's not so crazy hot outside anymore, but it's still nice and sunny.
Yeah,
And
right.
it will last for about a month, and then the disgusting, wet, cloudy thing starts, and then I will hate that.
Yeah, I'm like currently getting some coffee and sitting under a blanket right now. I'm actually freezing.
Oh.
But yeah, it's a good time of the year in general.
Yeah, honestly, I always had this thing that I thought that I prefer warm weather, but I'm pretty sure that I would enjoy living in Sweden or somewhere in Scandinavia quite a bit because this hot weather, especially at night with the sleeping, is just horrible. Or you run the AC all night and then you will have a crazy huge electricity bill, which is not very nice.
Yeah, our power went out not that long ago, and it was like midsummer, and I fell asleep. Like like those handheld fans.
Yeah.
Just holding the fan, trying to fall asleep is miserable. I cannot sleep when it's that hot.
Yeah, it's rough. In other news, I listened to your Stan Efferding interview, and it was pretty good. Yeah, Stan came across like a very nice, humble guy. Actually, maybe I just skipped over it, but you mentioned how, in retrospect, maybe you would have pushed back on a few things. The only thing I would have wondered about is what he would say about the kind of satiety aspect of all of this, where basically his diet is all about kind of lower volume, easily digestible foods so that people can eat a shit ton. But like, what would he advise for, people who, I mean, sometimes it's almost like you have to kind of take the bullet when you're dieting. Like, okay, I'm going to be a bit more bloated and I will have some digestive
Right.
issues, but at least I'm not hungry. I'm curious what he would say.
Yeah, I think I've heard that complaint before that people were really hungry on the diet, and that could be a problem when cutting. I think in general he would say to switch to slightly more, I guess foods. They're similar foods, but just forms that are harder to get down. Like, so for instance, he'll say when bulking up, maybe more ground beef versus when cutting, maybe more like steak. Maybe switching from orange juice to actual oranges. Probably just more vegetables, less rice, things like that. That's generally what I've seen recommended.
Yeah, actually, on that note, one thing I would wonder about is Mike Israetel, when he was on the podcast talking about steroids, we talked a bit about how these really big bodybuilders, they don't really struggle with hunger like naturals do, because normally the amount of food that they have to eat is making them sick. So half of the diet, maybe 70% of the diet, is just a relief that finally they don't have to stuff themselves all the time. But I would be curious, like, is that true for most of these guys? Because it sort of violates the whole kind of energy gap principle. Like, okay, maybe it's 4,000 calories and not 2,000, but if it's 1,000 calorie deficit, then it should still be uncomfortable. So I'm curious how that works. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at the start of the diet, it's certainly a nice break. Like, I mean, for me, when I first started dieting back in January, it was seriously the first month was just such a relief. I dropped 10 pounds probably in 5 weeks, and just not having to force feed all the time was great. And then obviously after a while, the reality of cutting sets in, and it gets worse and worse over time.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of cutting, our attempt is going to be to talk about some of the kind of craziest things that we have done due to our fitness goals, or some of the negative repercussions of chasing our fitness goals as much as we did. And I have some stuff written down for myself, and I think I experienced some low points about this. But first of all, just a quick question for you, Dave. Oh, you're just
Yep.
muted yourself, so maybe it's not the right time. Quick question. Top 15 muscle building mistakes. Go. Just kidding.
I've actually got a top 20 if we've got time.
Okay, and in reverse order, please. So start with
Reverse alphabetical order.
start with biggest mistake and with smallest mistake. No.
I've got a whole pyramid going.
Yeah. So in a general sense, I don't know, if you look back at your kind of fitness journey, would you say that overall it had kind of a positive impact on you psychologically, if you look at the whole thing, like area under the curve, well-being? Or would you say it was kind of a balance of the negative and the positive? Because I'm sort of struggling with that myself sometimes. I mean, certainly the whole thrill of how big can I get this year? How lean can I get this time? That was always exciting, and it was always nice to have that goal. And certainly I enjoyed training. But man, especially for the first couple of years, if I just add up all the neuroses and all of that stuff which I had to deal with,
Right.
I don't know if it's a net positive, to be honest. Like now it's a net positive that I did all of those things, because I think I have a better life quality all in all, and certainly I'm enjoying the results. But man, I gave myself a really hard time needlessly for a really long time. So I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two aspects to look at. So for one, it's like one of those things they say, more money doesn't make you happier after a certain point, right? And I mean, that's actually, there's actually research showing that maybe is not the case, and that generally speaking, people with more money are happier. But let's assume that that's largely true. There's kind of a saying of like, maybe that's the case, but I'd rather be crying in a mansion, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, and I would say that for myself, it's like, maybe I'm not happier because of like XYZ thing, but I'm still glad that it's the case, right? And so when it comes to like lifting, if I never got into it, like we've even said that with steroids, are people who take steroids any happier or more satisfied with their physique than people who don't take steroids? It's like, I really don't know if they are. I mean, they're often still chasing after goals, still disappointed, still just neurotic with it. Now, you could then argue, though, would they be even less happy? And I think that comes to, like, with lifting. I think, like, you and I and a lot of people we know, we're just as neurotic about some of these lifting things and our bodies and everything as people who don't really work out that much, as far as, like, how happy we are with our physiques and whatnot. But maybe with our personality types, we'd be even less happy if we never got into it. I have no idea. It's really hard to say. I look at somebody like my brother as an example, and it's kind of funny. Before he was lifting, he really thought he had this amazing body, and he was just super skinny, but he was lean. And he's certainly, I don't think he's any happier or content with his physique now, even though he has a much more impressive build. I think Dom Mazzetti in his Bro Science video says, like, the day you start lifting is the day you'll never be satisfied again, which has some truth to it. So I'm certainly very happy that I have gotten into the lifting lifestyle. Obviously, there's a ton of health benefits from exercise in general, but I don't know if I would say like it's maybe more content overall, but it's definitely something I'm glad I do.
Yeah, actually, one thing that comes to mind from that is when did you have that first moment, or when did you have that thought ever that, okay, I'm actually at this point definitely in much better shape than the average person around me, where, okay, if I go out to the beach with my buddies or something, I will definitely be the guy in the best shape. I mean, it's funny because you and I had some conversations about this privately, and I think you're a lot more critical with yourself than I am with myself on that front, or maybe what I think you should be. And maybe you actually have some friends that are in really good shape, but so how did you experience that?
Yeah, we did talk about that, and I don't know if it's also maybe like the difference in like, what countries we're in, but I feel like if I go to the beach, I am not confident that I would be like, one of the best bodies or anything like that. Like, I have a decent physique, especially like when leaner, but it's really not like, I mean, at 6'1" and, right now like 190 pounds, it's just, I wouldn't say that that's like stand out really at all. And that's not even me trying to be really critical of myself. It's just, again, we've talked about like when you just have clothes on, most natural bodybuilders look kind of normal, and when you're really lean, you can look kind of skinny. I have maybe two friends, maybe just one friend who really looks impressive, I would say, like when we're at the beach. But as far as when I at least got to the point where I'm like, okay, this is significantly above what the average person is, I would probably say when I was like 22, 23, I just started dental school, so I was probably already like 8 or 9 years into lifting at that point. And about 8 or 9. And when I had, you go to a new location, so you meet all these new people. And like when we'd be out at the bars and stuff, I'd have people like complimenting me, or like girls grab my arms or things like that, where I was like, okay, like that's not just happening. It's like everybody else, So stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that was, like I said, 8 years into lifting, which in large part is because I started so young. I mean, the average person would probably hit that within a couple of years of lifting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the countries definitely factor in. I think there's probably a correlation between how advanced the country is or how developed it is and how far the fitness industry has come. There are exceptions to that. So I mean, I don't know how advanced Bulgaria is, for example, compared to Macedonia, which is where I live. But Bulgaria has a huge fitness scene and probably also a very good genetic pool. Like I was on that conference where I even gave a talk, and man, some of those guys, I mean, of course, the steroid thing could also be an option. But in some cases, I was 100% convinced that the person was not using anything. And man, some of those, it's insane. I even have some pictures with some of them. It's just ridiculous. But so I think Macedonia is probably a good 8 to 10 years behind the US, for example. So Hungary, where I'm from, I think that's maybe 4 or 5 years behind the US. And then Macedonia is maybe 8 to 10, which is evident by, I just went to a store the other day and I saw that they had keto crackers. And that just arrived. I've never seen anything like this before here.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you guys had that in 2010 or something already.
Yeah, we've had a lot of keto stuff for quite a long time.
Yeah. So probably the fitness scene is a lot more advanced there. But I just had this thing where I went to this music festival and it was by a lake here. And so I saw a lot of people just, walk around on the beach. And I was shocked. A lot of people were, it's not just that they were fat or overweight or obese or whatever. It's, they had that kind of unhealthy look about them where I looked at them and man, you should do something about that. This is, this might get you into diabetes really fast.
Right.
That was pretty scary. So that's kind of one of the first moments when I realized okay, there's worlds separating me from kind of the average person on that front. But maybe that was a skewed perception. But for a long time, when I was 22, 23, I had that thought a lot of times that, man, I'm working a little bit too hard for the difference that I can present, between myself and these people. All these guys around me, they're not working out at all, and they look really similar to me. What the fuck? So I don't know if it's just that I was a slow burner or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, I also just think there's that huge range of kind of just looking normal. I have friends who really don't lift that much at all. I mean, my brother took months off with the pandemic and everything. I have another friend who took off, and it's yeah, if we were working out together and we were shirtless, I would look, I guess, significantly better than them. But when we're just all hanging out, we had a picnic recently, a barbecue, and I mean, in clothes, you just don't look that different. And we kind of talked about that before as far as naturals in the community. When you said you went to a conference and most people just weren't, they didn't really stand out. And I think that's just kind of the reality of if you're not going to use drugs or you don't have great genetics, most of the time you're kind of going to look like a normal person. It's hard to see that difference in clothes.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anyway, so back to our topic. So crazy things that we did. So I don't know how you thought about this. Do you have different themes that you collected these, or you just have a couple of stories? How did you go about this?
I thought of just more, not themes so much, just over the years, things where I look back and I'm I mean, some of them I think, why did I do that? And some of them I think I would do that again because that's just kind of how I am with this stuff. I usually don't like to go halfway, and that's maybe been a problem at times, but that's just kind of how I am.
All right, then maybe you can go with the first one, and then I'll go with my first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this would be. This is one that I've referenced before, and I don't know if I'd call it crazy. It's one of those things where if I became a top pro or something, people would look back at this story and be wow, he was dedicated. But because I didn't, it just looks stupid. So through high school, again, motivated at a very young age. So even 13, 14 years old, I got up at 5 a.m. every morning with my dad because I couldn't go to the gym otherwise. I didn't have a license yet. So I would get up at 5 a.m., including on the weekends. And so if my friends were going out on let's say a Friday night, I remember being out kind of just cruising around town with my brother, who's a couple years older, so he was able to drive. A couple of our friends, had girls in the car, and instead of just being a normal teenager and trying to hang out, I would have him drop me off at the house at 9 p.m. so that I could get to sleep and have my 8 hours, so I could get up at 4:45 to mix my protein shake for the 5 a.m. workout with my dad. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm proud of my young self for having that dedication, and I was very goal driven, but that is not something that I would have done again, because what was the point? Like, it really took away a lot of my social time in high school. And that's like something anybody who's listened to my podcast a lot knows that I kind of preach that, of like incorporating into your life in a better way. And that really took away, like you said, was I happier, at the start of this podcast? Are we happier because we do it? And I'm sure that I had a worse experience throughout most of my high school years because I was that obsessed with it. But like I said, if I became the next Phil Heath or the natural equivalent of it, people would say, like, that would be this grand story of how great it was that I did that and how dedicated I was. But I think for 99% of people, stuff like that, it's like, man, it's like, I'm proud of you for doing that, but like you're really kind of going nuts with it.
Yeah, and it's I think that is an unfortunate thing about fitness, and I actually had an Instagram post about this some time ago, that fitness is kind of unfortunate in that way that it's a very kind of vanity-focused pursuit. Like, basically, unless you're, like you said, you're gonna be making tons of money from this in some way, society, probably rightfully so, just looks at it as, okay, the best case scenario that can come out of this is that you will be much more muscular and leaner than the average person, which is kind of a shallow goal in some way. So if you're just doing that out of passion and you're making these sacrifices and missing out on social events, then you're kind of being viewed as ridiculous more so than anything else. Whereas if you did the same thing in, let's say you were studying for something, or maybe at that time you were maybe learning a language or whatever, and you were really dedicated to put in X hours into that, or maybe you were working on a business idea and you were making no sacrifices for that in other areas, then, then people would be looking at that as, wow, that's really amazing. Like, he's doing the right thing. Like, all of us should learn from this person. But because it's fitness and whatever, it's kind of looked down upon. It's kind of unfair in a way.
To some degree. I mean, I think in general there is an admiration for people who really work at like staying fit and having exercise and health as part of their life. If anything, I would say it's more so with health and fitness. Like, I think people, the average person, I think, appreciates somebody who's like getting after it with their health, and maybe not so much like with the vanity. I think there was just less to show for it in my case. Like you mentioned, like if you did that with studying, and I did that with studying as well, and the difference was, like, I had a lot to show for that, I mean, I graduated pretty much the top of my class through high school, college, like, and, now I have a career to show for it and have those results. Whereas with lifting, we've talked before about how your input really often does not match your output in terms of results for yourself, and especially compared to other people.
Yeah, and I also think it's an age thing. So I think if, say, a 40-year-old guy does that, or a 50-year-old guy, then that's admired a lot more. Whereas even if the person doesn't have amazing results to show for that. So if you see a 50-year-old person who is in moderately good shape, looks nothing like a fitness influencer or whatever, maybe doesn't even have a six-pack, and then does that, it's like, wow, he should be an example for all of us. Whereas I think good physiques and fitness and all of these things when you're younger, so around 20, college years, those sorts of things, I think fitness is looked at something as, it's good if you have it, it's great if you look awesome, but if it requires a lot of effort, then it's not very attractive anymore.
Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah. I actually specifically remember someone saying that. It was a girl that I really liked, and we had this conversation, and that's where I started to kind of develop, for a period of time, this kind of inner grudge where I viewed the world as sort of this mean place where there's no place for people like me who's really dedicated about fitness. Because the girl said, yeah, there's this guy, and she showed me a picture. I like him, but yeah, I mean, and he had like a really good body. So I was like, oh wow, he looks pretty good. And she was like, yeah, but he's like really into it, and I don't know, if it requires a lot of effort, it's not that attractive anymore. And I'm like, what a fucked up thing to say. Wow.
I wonder if that's also, again, going back to the location, because I feel like, especially nowadays, that like most Americans, like at that age, like, you know, like the late teens, early 20s, the whole fitness thing is like a really big thing here now. But maybe, like you said, you're like kind of like 10 years behind. I feel like in the past, maybe that was the case. You know, girls would kind of talk shit on guys who cared that much about it. And now I feel like it's almost the standard.
Oh, man, that would be a better place to be.
Yeah, just wait 10, 15 years. You'll get there.
Actually, this story that I said was in New Zealand. But I think they're behind in a different way. I think it's just a different mentality. I think logistically and all of those things, they are pretty close to the US in many ways. But yeah, anyway, so my first one. So I basically categorized my things in kind of three different periods in my life, which I would kind of consider to be low points in terms of fitness. And the first one is maybe not the most exciting, but I think it's important to mention this because I think it's good to know where we come from. And maybe you will have some similar story. So I had my kind of zealot / dogmatic kind of arrogant phase in fitness. Where I actually started out, like I said before, as a kind of low-carb keto zealot. That was my first exposure to the whole fitness scene. So initially, I started out following Mark Sisson's work, you know who is, right? Primal, Blueprint, paleo guy.
Yeah, I know the name.
Then I got into Dave Asprey Bulletproof Diet, which is might be might be the worst of all of. In my defense, when I started following him, he wasn't as cringy as he is now, so that was at least a good thing. John Kiefer carb backloading, so it gets worse from here. Gary Taubes, I was also like really hooked on his stuff, and so the thing with these people, which a lot of people into the evidence-based kind of fitness sphere don't realize, is that if you don't have a decent kind of foundation in terms of fitness knowledge and fitness science knowledge, you don't know the basics, then these people are incredibly compelling because they are very well spoken, they are pretty charismatic, they are very good verbally. And I mean, of course, now it's clear to see, which I didn't see at the time, that they talk a lot, they speak a lot, but they say very little. So there's pretty little substance behind what they are saying. But it can be very compelling. It's very easy to be convinced by them. And essentially, the whole thing is a conspiracy theory, almost, that they build the whole thing on. So yes, this is the simple science. Insulin does these things. That's what's making us fat, and it's also the root cause of all kinds of diseases. But doctors don't want to say this, and anyway, the sugar industry is funding these people, and we cannot talk about this publicly. And if you go to a doctor and you talk about ketosis and this and that, they will have no idea what you're talking about. And at one point, I was basically able to just tell you their entire speech. I could just say the whole thing, by heart.
Yeah.
I was so hooked on them. I was always listening. That's actually how my English got as good as it is now, because I was listening to these guys' podcasts and stuff all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I just developed this incredibly massive amount of arrogance inside of me because of that. So I would be ready to give a lecture to anybody who was saying something about nutrition that I didn't agree with. I don't know. In college, I had classmates, some girl who was complaining about, I cannot lose weight, I have these struggles, and I would be like, well, this is your problem, and I would be just giving, it was awful. Possibly the worst thing that I did at that time was, so in New Zealand, I had this flatmate. She just moved in at the time, and I just came home, and she was sitting at in the living room at the table, just messing around on her phone. We introduced ourselves, and what do you do? And she was studying to be a dietitian, and she was fairly overweight. And because I had this arrogance in me and I was listening to these guys for so long, I got so annoyed immediately that this girl is overweight and she's going to be the one who is teaching people about nutrition. Mm-hmm. And this is horrible. And I just asked right away, so would you say that you are where you want to be, in terms of your like fitness and health and whatever. And like I could see the girl, she reacted pretty well to it, but I could see that I pretty much destroyed him with that sentence. And I thought that was completely acceptable. I was like, yeah, of course. Like, this is what you do. You're being honest. Like, this is how things are. And now I'm looking back at it, and man, like, how could I think that that was okay? Like, Jesus Christ.
I remember when I was I think also a freshman in high school, and there was like the football team, and a lot of like big jack guys, and the coach was really big. And I had just started Bill Starr's 5x5.
Well, I know 5x5, but isn't it like? Oh no, that's 5-3-1. Yeah.
It's like the Mad Cow. It's like that. Yeah. So, but Bill Starr, I mean, he was actually known as like he like trained football teams and everything. So I remember almost like going to the coach as like 130-pound, like 6 foot at the time kid, and telling them that like they should use this program. And the thing is, like in reality, that program was probably better than whatever they were doing. I mean, Bill Starr was, like I said, like kind of a legend and trained football teams. But I think just like the audacity of this 130-pound 14-year-old going to like an experienced football coach with this huge team of guys and being like, you know what, you're doing your workouts wrong. This is what you should be doing. I'm like, I'm so glad I stopped myself from doing that. Just like how embarrassing that would have been.
Yeah. No, for sure. But the worst thing about it is, it's not just the arrogance towards other people, but I was so entrenched in that whole dogma that I didn't even admit to myself how I was feeling. So I actually, like I told you before, I didn't do really well on low carb at all. It's not, my workouts were fine. I never noticed a big difference there, but my hunger levels were not very well managed. Energy levels were not very good. And also, for example, fasting. So I was doing intermittent fasting basically for 3 years in some form all the time. And for a period of time, actually, I had a 4-hour eating window every single day. I did that for like a year.
Oh, wow.
And it was horrible, honestly. I was basically from noon onwards, I was counting the minutes until it was finally 4 p.m. because then I could go home.
Oh, okay.
And I gave myself basically unlimited access to food in that time window. And because I was eating low carb and, calories don't matter. So... And then if I had to stay in college for a bit longer, then it was horrible because, oh my God, now I'm getting home even later. So that was really shit. And honestly, I never did that well on fasting. Like, I like having a breakfast.
Yeah.
And it was so hard to let go of that eventually. And I was insisting on that at all costs. I remember I had to help out on this construction site. So we were moving an apartment basically. So I was lifting heavy, carrying heavy stuff up and down the stairs and whatever. And I would still not eat until like 2 p.m. or something. And I almost passed out. It was, yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, so that's my origins, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I actually knew all those details. I mean, I knew to an extent, but not to that degree.
Yeah. And honestly, since then, I'm really trying my best to not get too confident about anything that I say, so which will prevent me from being maybe as appealing on YouTube, for example, because I will not be making crazy claims. But I just learned such a hard lesson because I was so embarrassed in front of a lot of those people that are still my friends to this day, in front of my family. Like my mother was following everything that I told her to the T. But anyway, so what's next for you on the list?
I think, in part, this is one of those things that, I mean, we talked about this in a private message, just that the extent to which I had taken things, even compromising my health, and unfortunately, like I said, I do have some health issues that the average person just doesn't have to deal with, but one is like some pretty severe GI issues, and just not wanting to let go of the whole like size game and still trying to push, even though I kind of knew that it was over, that like after 15 years it was kind of done. And literally, so the last time I had kind of, I guess if you want to call it, bulked up, and I got up to about like 210, and I really, like, of May of 2019, maybe even a little bit before that, I was like really over it. Like, I wanted to be done with it, but I just thought, like, let me just try to hold on to this as long as possible. So for a whole year. I mean, I was force feeding down probably 3,600 to 4,000 calories, which in the past actually would not have really seemed that hard at all. Like to say force feeding, that's like not that many calories. But with my GI issues, it made it really difficult. And I remember a story where Eric Helms mentioned that he made his whole meal and he threw up, but he didn't want to lose the This is like disgusting. He didn't want to lose the calories, so he threw up in a bowl and then he chugged it, which is like unbelievably gross. So I don't know.
Do you believe that story completely?
I mean, I don't know if he has a reason to lie. I mean, maybe it was like not a lot, but
Yeah.
But when I thought about that, I was like, I don't know if this is like the equivalent of that, but I have had it where, well, I had food poisoning about a year ago, which was god awful, and I just like continue to eat this like food that had gone bad because like I didn't want to get rid of it, and I severely paid the consequences for that. But then another time, similar time frame, I was like having like really bad GI distress, and I remember literally like just being on the toilet, just shitting out my last meal while eating my next meal, because I was just like like literally being on the toilet just eating my next meal because I was like, well, I got to get these calories in. And just like the amount of distress and just stress I was causing on my body was probably very counterproductive. And I think since then I've kind of decided like it's just not possible anymore. Like I would not be able to bulk up to max weights. But that was probably one of the most extreme I've gone in terms of damaging to my health at all costs, just trying to do whatever I could.
Wow, that's and were you in like a time rush, or why couldn't you wait until you got off the toilet?
A lot of times it was, yeah, like if it was like I'm getting ready in the morning or something like that, and I've got to like go somewhere, and it's just like I like thinking back, like honestly, it wasn't even like that. Like in the morning, it was just like, well, I gotta take a shit and I gotta get the shakedown before I go to work or whatever, and yeah, just not a fun time.
How was your relationship with food at that time? Because I don't know. I would imagine if I did things like that on a regular basis, I would be pretty disgusted just by the thought of eating food. But
Yeah, well, that's why it was so easy to cut. I mean, like so that period where I just stayed at like 210 was probably from January of 2019 to about January of 2020, and maybe like a little bit longer than that. So when I finally cut, I mean, the first 6 weeks were probably the easiest cut of my life because all I had to do was just not continue force feeding. And I dropped probably, like I said, 10 pounds in 6 weeks or so. And then after that, for me at this point, like I just like around 190 to 195 is a very nice medium where it's like I can kind of eat what I want and the hunger just reacts to that, and so it's much more comfortable. Obviously getting down to like 180, that's when I'm really food focused, and the relationship with food is bad in the other direction. Though I would still say I might prefer that over just chronically feeling disgusting, and again, it's a little different for me compared to the average person because of my like actual GI issues. But yeah, I definitely didn't want to eat very often.
yeah, actually, that's what I wanted to ask. Because 4,000 calories, even. I mean, it's not that much if you distribute that over a 16-hour waking period or so. So, like, is it the case that because of GI issues and stuff, when you ate a normal size meal, you just started feeling like nauseous from it, or how was that?
It wasn't so much nauseous. It's like pretty severe cramps, and just like other issues. Like I said, I mean, I actually have like inflammation going on, so it's not like the typical person who just feels full. I mean, fullness can suck, but like if I think back to like high school, the only time I really ever had a hard time getting calories down was when I did keto bulking. So yeah, like 4,000 calories of just keto and like drinking olive oil and stuff like that we've talked about. Yeah, that was pretty gross. But generally it was not so much like fullness that was the issue itself, but like actual like pain and like increased inflammation. Anybody who's ever had like severe visceral pain compared to like an external pain knows that it can get pretty significant. So I mean, I really at some points just like wasn't able to function at work, and I'd have to like go to the bathroom several times a day. It's just like I can't really do my job like that because obviously like I'm seeing patients all day. So it's very infrequent that you'd have like, okay, I can just take 10 minutes to do something. Like you have to go to this room and this room. It's as far as a quality of life thing, I mean, it was definitely having a significant impact in a negative way.
Right, right. Actually, since you brought up the keto bulk, I actually always wanted to ask you this on a live call. So you mentioned drinking olive oil. So I never did keto bulk, but like, why do you have to resort to those things? Are there not like tastier stuff that you can eat on a keto bulk, which would be a bit more enjoyable?
Yeah, I remember you giving me shit for this before. I think so. At the time, I mean, I could literally probably pull up my old like logs from that time and look at the calories. But actually, I don't know if you want to like pause the recording here. I'm actually going to look that up real quick just to see. All right. So back then, this was like the times of 2 grams per pound of body weight, and so I had specific ratios. So honestly, I don't even know if I was in ketosis because my protein was so high. But like I'm looking at the calories here. So 3,900 calories. 350 grams of protein. And keep in mind, I'm like 150 pounds at the time. So 350 grams of protein. Had to keep carbs under 50, so that was a big thing, right? And 245 grams of fat. So going through like the diet, just like looking at here, I mean, it was way too high of protein. And so like, you could say, well, why didn't you just eat more peanut butter? I mean, for the first time in my life, peanut butter became disgusting, which I normally love. It was rare that I was drinking olive oil. Usually I would just cook it in olive oil. So, I'd have like 5 ounces of chicken breast, cooking it in like several tablespoons of olive oil, and then I'd have peanut butter with more olive oil. I mean, it wasn't like I was constantly drinking it, but like there had to be so much fat. I'd mix in oil with like whole eggs or even just like egg yolks. I was doing a lot of, and the diet itself was just really boring. I mean, it was just constantly meat and oil, meat and eggs. I mean, it's just a very undesirable diet to try to bulk up on.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like, let's say I did a 4,000 calorie bulk on keto, and then I would make a breakfast out of maybe, 4 eggs, a decent amount of cheese, and some bacon, which is maybe not the healthiest thing that you can do. Maybe a bit too much saturated fat just in that one meal. So probably you want to be a bit more balanced. But still, with some tomatoes, I mean, that's a pretty sweet meal. And probably 1,000 calories already just in there. And
yeah, this was also the period where I was very strict on the types of food I was eating as well. So like in hindsight, it's like, why didn't you just have steak or ground beef or even like I said, like bacon or something like that? So I was eating, instead of having any fatty meats, it was like chicken and a ton of olive oil. Like that was just all I was doing. Like I guess eggs would be like the fattiest protein I was eating, but for whatever reason, I wasn't having any ground beef. I wasn't having any processed meats, which is maybe better for my health. But I'm just saying, like I was eating as bland a foods as you could really eat.
Yeah. All right. Actually, I really want to try this one time, but yeah, I will do a keto bulk one time. It's on my bucket list.
Try it for like a week and see how you like it. I actually had a keto when I was like kind of doing carnivore and keto during my cut. I had a keto refeed and it was like 8,000 calories. But that included like those keto protein bars and things like that. And actually, it was kind of amazing. By the end of the day, I had something like 300 grams of carbs because all of these, they'll be marketed as like net carbs. So my net carbs were probably like 100. But all these different products, they have all this like random crap in it that's like sugar alcohols and things like that. But despite having 300 grams of total carbs, I was actually still in ketosis at the end of the day because I had like 700 grams of fat and like 500 grams of protein. It was actually fairly enjoyable because I was so hungry. But I don't think I could have gotten nearly that many calories if I wasn't having, like whipped cream from Heavy Cream and like protein bars and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I would just intuitively think that's basically how easily you will gain weight on a keto diet will just be a function of how liberal you are with cheese. And then after that, maybe like nuts and nut butters and things like that, which, I mean, if you want to be like pretty strict keto, then the carbs will be a problem in those, no question, because you will probably still want to eat some vegetables and things like that, so it will add up.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyway, so all right, so my next one is sort of the next kind of low point in my life, and that's basically the whole kind of binge eating, disordered eating kind of theme. And that, to me, I don't exactly know where to date that. Probably when I really got into the whole health stuff, that's when I just generally developed this pattern of wanting to eat more so alone, and having these meals be this nice ritual where it's just me and I'm putting something nice on and I'm focusing on that. And for a while it was great. And then after some point I started to notice that, okay, kind of my whole day is revolving around that, but I didn't mind it for a long time. But then by the time when I got really lean the first time, of course, that was a really big help in further developing that tendency.
Right.
So, yeah, and that was when I was 22 to 23. That's where I got to like single digit body fat the first time. And after that, I definitely started to have these things where it was not just overeating, but it's overeating with that, when you feel that you're not in control of things anymore. So I can give a couple of examples. So one really kind of comical story that I have on that is, I told you this story in private, but maybe you forgot about it. So I was dating this girl when I was 23. And she had her birthday, and I ordered this cake from a pastry shop with her name on it. And she came over for the weekend, and I was greeting her with that cake, and we spent the weekend together. And then she lived like far away from me, so we only met for the weekends and stuff. And when she was leaving, I could kind of tell that she forgot about that cake. and immediately my brain went, oh my God, maybe she's going to leave that cake here, and I'm going to eat that whole thing, because she didn't even touch it. Like, it was still, the whole thing was there, and it looked amazing. And then literally I could not even focus on, I'm not going to see her for at least another week or something. These are the last moments, whatever, saying goodbye. I was like, just get the fuck out. I want to eat that cake. And then she stepped out the door, got in the car, and I watched her leave, and I still waited for like another half an hour, because like maybe she could still realize that she left it here. So let's wait until she's in safe distance.
Could you imagine she comes back after half an hour and you just got that cake like all over your face?
Yeah, I mean, that was my nightmare. So I really made sure that that's not gonna happen. And yeah, so I started devouring that whole thing. And honestly, it wasn't even that good. It was like way too thick. So you had like 2 bites and you started feeling nauseous from it, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, looking back, it's hilarious and sad and just absurd in every way. But that was a really messed up time looking back. So the thing that I got really wrong with kind of managing my eating psychology is that I was strict all throughout the week. And then I kind of used the time that I spent with her as a time where I could kind of let go and, be a bit more loose. And that was kind of my 2 cheat days, basically. So I was just going with her wherever, restaurants, buffets, we would be having good food. But because of that, basically, I was not even focusing on her eventually. I was just so preoccupied with the food. So we would go to a restaurant, and I would not even enjoy the whole experience, because I would be just obsessed with, oh my God, what more can we get? And right. She would be like, yeah, just let's have something. I was like, no, that's not enough. Let's have something more. And it was just completely pathological. And yeah, one other really bad thing was, so we were in this restaurant, and at first we sat down to this nice place. Like, the fireplace was behind us. It was really nice. It has this really nice vibe. And I was like, okay, this is going to be great. We are going to be having great food. And then she didn't like that place, so she wanted to sit somewhere else. And then we ended up sitting next to this family, and, like, the mother was like breastfeeding the kid. Kid was like making a huge mess, yelling, screaming. And I got so pissed that she ruined this nice experience for me by sitting next to this family, that I just started to, I don't know what I did, but probably I was making some really obvious faces, kind of expressing how much I'm not approving of this whole thing. And eventually the family ended up leaving, and my girlfriend was like destroyed, so embarrassed, because she said that the woman was so distressed by me being so upset that they ended up leaving. And looking back, it's just like, my goodness, like, it's unbelievable. It's like talking about a different person. And that's what this whole dieting and messed up relationship with food can do to you, literally. Like, you turn yourself inside out. You turn into a different person. It's just insane.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think that's somewhat common with a lot of people. Like, it just changes your. I mean, everybody knows the term hangry, and it really just changes who you are and like your rationality. I mean, it's like almost like a primal thing. Like when you just don't have something for a long time, like you said, it makes you almost have a different personality. And it sounds like from some of the stories you've told me that it's something that was pretty significant in your past that you've had to deal with. So obviously, it's something like you've learned over time, but it's not uncommon at all in the industry.
Yeah. And one thing I want people to realize is that it's not the case. So basically, where I date my kind of redemption from all of this is around 2017. And I would say that since then, I did not binge at all since then. I can say that confidently. Now, that doesn't mean that I never overate. I never ate more than I should have. Of course I did. But what I really made a strong point in is just not having that kind of loss of control. I have no agency over this whole thing anymore. So since then, if I overeat, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to overeat now and I'm going to enjoy it. And then also, I'm not allowing myself to go to that place mentally where I'm like, okay, this is my one last chance to have all the crap that I want. But from tomorrow onwards, it's back to being like all tidy and nicely managed. So I'm like, no, I'm going to enjoy this. And tomorrow, no, I'm not going on a diet tomorrow. We will see what happens tomorrow. I'm going to enjoy this as much as I want. And then whatever, moving on. And I think that to me is like a really big key. I think for most people, that's something that they have to let go of, this, this last dinner or last supper effect, which sets you up. I don't know. Did you have, I know that you had some stuff like this, but probably not to the extent that I dealt with this, but does any of this sound familiar to you?
Well, I'd say it's very, very relatable, the whole like, this is my chance kind of mindset. And that's something I've heard from other people as well. But there's so many times where people, including myself, will eat more than they actually even want because like this is their time, right? And unfortunately, I think where people have gotten away from that now to some degree, at least in the evidence-based industry, as far as like cheat days and things like that. But man, I look back on even like Body for Life when I first got started. There was like a Saturday was like your free day. You could eat whatever you wanted. And to be a 13-year-old kid and saving food from like Tuesday so that you could eat it Saturday, it was, obviously just ridiculous. Like writing things down of what you were going to have. It was just, again, kind of ridiculous. And getting to the point where it's like, I'm full, but this is my day to do it. And then eating way more than you need. So then you have to make up for it the next day. And then that starts this cycle is really not healthy. Obviously, like physically, it's not healthy, but from a mental standpoint, your mindset, it's really not good. So that part is very relatable. And even now, I think we talked about this before, but anytime you have a restriction of something at one point and an indulgence at another, you're going to create a dynamic that has you focused on it. And so you could see that on a short-term scale with intermittent fasting, right? You are not allowed to eat during this period. So during this other period, you can eat whatever you want. You could see this on a kind of like medium scale of refeeds, right? Where, okay, I'm not going to eat. And you and I talk about this with my refeed method now that I'm really going to be switching because of this. Because it's like, you have 3 low days, 1 high day, but those high days are pretty large. Well, in those 3 days, you're going to focus on it. And that 1 high day, it's kind of like, well, this is my chance again. Same mentality. And you could see that on a macro scale of, people who are doing contest preps or large diets where it's like, oh, once it's done, I'll eat whatever I want. They do a 12, 24, whatever week diet. And then this is now their time to eat and they go overboard. And it's something that, it doesn't mean that you should never have a restriction in calories or food intake. But when you have it set up like that, you're going to often create a focus on it. And, you see that with people who, even like us, who are experienced and can often be objective about it, that still happens. So it's definitely relatable.
Yeah, I think the main thing there is just so basically restricting something is one thing, but then allowing it to be there periodically, I think that necessarily puts that food on a pedestal. So, for example, I have that with certain things which I'm allowing myself to eat sometimes, but not other times. I definitely crave those regularly. But peanut butter, because I didn't have that for so long, God, I think the last time I had peanut butter would have been in 2017, like April or something like that.
Really?
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I could, I guess, recall how it tastes and smells, but I don't have, I go weeks without even thinking about it. And even when I think about it, it's usually when I'm making a video, making an example on that. But
Do you not eat it because you don't think you'd like it as much anymore, or because it was like a trigger food?
yeah, because it was a trigger food, and it's just,
Interesting.
and the thing is, so for example, oatmeal was a big culprit for me. I don't know why. It's kind of weird now that I'm eating it regularly, because actually it is pretty filling. It is definitely not as filling as like vegetables or something.
Right, for
I'm
sure.
guessing because the texture is smooth and kind of nice, and basically the palatability to satiation ratio is not as favorable. Whereas when you have enough vegetables, you really had enough. Like you don't think about that afterwards. Like, oh, it would be so nice to have even more vegetables. But you can be kind of still not hungry. Like you're still pretty full from the previous meal, but if it was pretty tasty, you're like, I could have more of that. So I have a little bit of that with oatmeal, but like the damage is not that big if you overeat. It's pretty calorie dense compared to something like fruit or vegetables. But I mean, peanut butter, god damn it, like 600 calories per 100 gram. Like if you overdo that, like you create a lot of damage really fast. So that's why I was like, nah,
Right.
this is I'm playing with the fire here. So it's easier for me to just cut it out, and then later on, where I felt like I was safe, I did not feel the need to reincorporate that. So that's why I just didn't have it. Yeah. Anyway, you want to go for number 3, I believe?
Sure. I mean, this is kind of on the same. This is probably the last one I really have is in my mind, which is one you kind of just touched on with your girl in the past. And this was, I think, the way we started talking about this podcast, like to do this one, was when I sent you a voice message maybe 2 weeks ago on when I kind of had that, where I had a planned refeed. And I went to go get some food, and it was food that, like, first of all, it wasn't like it was something I hadn't had before. It wasn't like this really unique thing. But when I went, it was taken out of the fridge. That basically I thought it was going to be there, and it wasn't, and it was already eaten. And I remember just getting like like way too upset. Now again, this is like relatively close to being post diet, so there's still some significant food focus, but I think the way I was going about these refeeds naturally increased my focus on food. And so it was way bigger of a deal than it should have been. And you like look at that. I mean, that's why I messaged you, because I was like, dude, like this is not like this is a problem. Like, and it is always interesting. I think the reason these podcasts can be good is because it's relatable to people, where it's like, look, like just because, we might be coaching people and we might have good advice doesn't mean that we're always 100% on point with that, right? Like we're going to have times where we see ourselves and like we're disappointed with our body image, for example, or we have too much focus on food. And even if we have the answer, which I think in the majority of cases we do when it comes to these sort of things, it doesn't, you can know something's the case, and it doesn't necessarily prevent it from happening. You know what I mean? I mean, you can look at this in like social instances as well. You could say, well, all right, I'm going to use this loud voice here. And even though like, it's coming, like they're going to say, if they like yell at you, you might still feel that intimidation, even though they're literally telling you like, I'm about to do this thing, right? So having knowledge of something doesn't necessarily prevent it. And so when this food was not there, I was overly upset. And I remember like trying to find out like what alternative food I could have. And then I tried to sub in something else, and it tasted even worse. So then I was like annoyed by that, up until the point that like literally till I went to sleep, it was still bothering me. And that's kind of like when I like step back and reassess things. Now the plus side is having the experience you and I do, we can look at that and then make an assessment of it rather than it just becoming this perpetual cycle. So I could step back and say, all right, that's a problem. Like, I don't want that to continue to be the case. Just like you were able to say that with like other examples that you've given of like, this is a problem, it needs to be adjusted, versus maybe somebody who doesn't have the knowledge base, like that could just be how they go about it for years. I mean, that's unfortunately, that does happen. So it was actually in hindsight, pretty funny that like this random dessert I was going to have was like this big deal that I could have literally like any other time. But we like create this importance of something that the average person would be like, who the hell cares about that? Like, just eat this the next day. You know, I mean, I think a lot of these stories, they almost kind of tie in because at base level, it's an obsession and neuroticism and an over focus on the importance of things that the average person would just really not put too much emphasis on. And I think, you know, you could even tie that back into your first question of, does this make you happier overall? And I think there is so much potential for this endeavor to make your life so much better. But in doing so, you need to make sure that you're focusing on the important things and just trying to go more big picture there. It's when you start focusing on these little details, like that's when you need to step back. And I think that's a big message that you and I both have.
Yeah, honestly, the funny thing is that I actually wanted to make a YouTube video on this, and I'm kind of hesitating whether I should make it because it's a little bit gimmicky, the whole thing. But it's basically, if I could give myself one advice, you know, looking back, you know, people do these videos like one thing I wish I knew when I started lifting and whatever. And it's always things like, I wish I knew that I have to use full range of motion or to track my calories or eat enough protein and in these things. And to me, honestly, all of those things are, I mean, okay, I wish I knew that, but I mean, I figured it out anyway pretty soon, so who cares? But this thing, right, which we talked about, and you talked about this with Eric Helms, and like we talked about, it's a lot of people will not, I mean, they will hear the message, but they will not realize how important it really is, because it sounds kind of like one of these bullshit things that people just say, and we just become numb to the idea. But really the concept of just enjoying the process, as I'm saying it now, is such a bullshit cliche thing to say. But really for the longest time, I did not enjoy this whole process. And I used to, when Börge, Fagerli, and these people would say things like, you know, where's the rush? You're going to achieve your genetic potential anyway over time. Like, why do you have to try to achieve it next year? Like, why are you risking injury in the gym by doing all this volume and whatever? Just take it steady and slow. And in the moment, it sounds ridiculous because you feel like you're in such a rush to achieve all of these things. But I really wish that I could have just enjoyed myself more, because now that I'm pretty much maxed out or very close to it, it's like, man, it was a lot of fun, you know, each year setting that goal of I'm going to be this big this year, or I'm going to get this lean. And now that I've done most of those things, it's like, man, it would be so nice if I still had that. I wish I enjoyed it a bit more while I had it. So that's a really big lesson there. But actually, it's funny because as you said, told me that story at the time, my first reaction was, man, you actually handled that pretty nicely. Like I did way worse things in situations like that.
I think maybe this would be like kind of like my closing point. I don't think I mentioned this on the last podcast. I think it was something I messaged you in a voice message. Was this almost sounds like a like something that you'd like read on some like bullshit like motivational poster or whatever, and it doesn't even make sense. But like I was trying to think of a good way to word this, and it's going to sound ridiculous at first, so let me explain it. But it was like live as if you're coming from the future. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of us will think back to past periods of time where it should have been really enjoyable. And if we could go back to that time for like a day or a week, we'd probably really appreciate it, right? You know, especially I think the older you get, I think if you take a lot of like, you know, 40-year-olds, if they think, hey, you can have a week living back in college time or whatever it is, you know, and like they would really revel in that period of like, wow, like I'm younger, I'm fitter, maybe I'm better looking, whatever it is. Like, and even some of the bad times, like places where I remember at that time thinking like I didn't want to be there or whatever. When I think back to it, maybe it's like some rosy retrospection, but there's this kind of nostalgia about it, where it's like, man, like that really could have been a better time. Like high school, I think of like how frustrated I was at my lack of gains and just like a lot of things that, you know, I would objectively say my life is probably better now than then. Like relative to like my cohort, you know, like I am in way better shape than most people my age, whereas back then I was probably middle of the road. You know, I am better looking than I used to be. You know, I have a great job. Like just in general, things are probably objectively better. But if I could go back there for a week and it'd be like, man, like you're seeing like all these friends, you're like having these experiences that like you maybe forgot about. I think in that, week, let's say that you're living in the past, you would appreciate it so much more. And I think, in most cases, and I think 10 years from now, probably you, me, we're probably going to look back at this period and say like, man, like these things that we worried about, a lot of them weren't as big of a deal, or I really should have appreciated, like, look at how I can do this time. Like, look at, a sad example is you look at somebody like Flex Wheeler. Do you follow like anything in the IFBB much, Abel?
Is he the one who got his leg amputated?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so he probably had a period, a few years back where he was maybe complaining about like having to do X, Y, Z. And if he was back then, he'd probably be so appreciative that he just has a leg, right? And as like, obviously that's a kind of morbid example, but I do think this really applies to like lifting and bodybuilding and all this stuff, but really just life in general. There's probably so much that we fret about and worry about that if we were like back at that time, we'd be like thinking like how enjoyable it could be. So I just think it's something that like, 10 years from now, what are you going to be thinking about this period of time? And hopefully you can enjoy it, and did that meal that we didn't get matter that much, or that food wasn't there, or that we had to do this different thing with a workout. I think we'd just be so happy that like we could be in the gym, working out, doing something that we love, rather than like really freaking out. And the neuroticism that you and I see in our clients, that's one of the reasons I like to work with people, is I see that, and I just, if I can reach them and get them to have that change of mindset, that to me is a huge win, because I see my old self in a lot of my clients, and it's like, man, like I know exactly what you're feeling, and like I can't emphasize enough how much we need to change your perspective on things.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, and it's I know this will reach some people, this message. For some people it will be, they just won't be able to resonate with it, but it's so true that I look back at a lot of periods in my life where I can remember that I did not enjoy myself. In fact, it was a struggle. Like my first year in college, I'm pretty sure at one point I could have been diagnosed with depression. That's when I actually took up lifting because I needed some outlet. But it was a horrible period. Like I was at home a lot of the times, alone. I was avoiding people, but still looking back, I'm just thinking of all the freedom, how burdenless that whole period was. But one thing about that though is the world around you is doing a really good job at making you feel like this whole thing that you're going through right now, like there's a lot at stake. And there is, in a way, like even in high school, like you should not fail your grade ideally, right? But in the grand scheme of things, not failing your grade is so easy. Even getting decent grades is pretty easy if you're like somewhat intelligent. But yeah, even in high school, the teachers and everybody, it was made out to be something like, you have to be disciplined and this is so serious and oh my God, you were late from class and whatever. And looking back, like, man, nobody gave a shit. Like we could have done anything pretty much. Like it could have been such a more fun time, and it was still pretty good. But yeah, I just wish I enjoyed those times a lot more. But it's not easy. Like I know that what you're saying is true of me right now, and I'm not hating life, but I wouldn't say that I'm thrilled by my day-to-day existence, But I'm pretty sure one day I will look back at this and will be like, man, that was the time. So it's really, really hard.
Right. Yeah, well, this is becoming quite the philosophy podcast we've got going on.
Yeah. So my number 3 is sort of actually very similar to yours, and that is basically the asshole that I became during certain diets. And I think I didn't speak about this that much. I hinted at it here and there in videos and stuff that I was not really myself basically during this photo shoot diet. But man, looking back, I can just not understand certain things that I did and the way I behaved. And I really hit a low point in many, many ways. And in the moment, of course, I felt that it was all justified because, I'm going to get these awesome photos. And I was sort of planning, this is a little bit embarrassing to say, but I was kind of planning that a new period will begin for me where I will be this, like, maybe not a Jeff Cavalier type person, but this very lean guy who is always super lean and like teaching people how to stay super lean, because I was just so inspired by what I was doing, basically. Like, oh my God, like I never seen my body like this. This is incredible. I have veins everywhere. I'm so lean. Like, I have abs without flexing. This is unbelievable.
Right.
And yeah, so I felt like the end was justifying the means, but at a certain time I was basically just putting everything aside for my goal. And just a couple of things that I can think of. I was visiting my parents at a certain point. To be honest, part of that was I just wanted to spend a few days just away from everybody, just being completely isolated. And, my parents were like working during the day and whatever, so I could just chill in the house and be alone and hit my workouts, eat my food. So it was a pretty good retreat on that front. And then my mother approached me at one point and she wanted to talk about some serious things. There were some talks of me and my girlfriend moving back to Hungary and things like that. And I remember I was just giving her this really short answer of like, or she wanted to go out to eat. And, as you can imagine at that point, like near the end of the diet, how much I wanted to go out to a restaurant to eat.
Right.
And I was just giving this really kind of short, abrupt, sort of rude answer of like, I don't want to do that. And like, we can talk another time. Like, why do we have to make this big deal out of this? That was an asshole move. I remember my girlfriend inviting me to some event, which is, have you seen the movie? I think it's called My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Long time ago.
Yeah, so if anybody has seen that, is this, I think, American guy who gets into this Greek family because he likes this girl and they're going to get married and the whole family is making this big fuss and he's like an alien in their world, like these Balkan people and this American guy, like the whole thing is just so weird to him. And that guy's story is kind of my story in Macedonia. So I just don't... I like being here, but I don't really belong here. Like, the people are so different than me. Like, I'm a pretty introverted person, and people here are very, like, in each other's face, like, very, like, touchy, huggy, loud, whatever. It's like, gets way too much for me very fast. And there's this one yearly event where all these people gather, like, I don't know, 100 people in a house, and just really loud music, food everywhere, drinks everywhere, and... I don't like being there that much because I just, like, it's like being on the moon or something. I just don't know what to do with myself there. And I had to go there like at the tail end of my diet. And my girlfriend was like, you know what? You can leave at midnight if you want, but just be there, please. It's really important for me that you're there. And I went there at like 10 and I left at midnight. And everybody was looking at me like, what are you doing? Like, this is, it was just beginning at that point. But I was like, no, like I'm leaving at midnight. Like I have to wake up early the next day.
Right.
And even that, like looking back, like, man, I was like so selfish and whatever. And honestly, it was just a good learning experience. I heard these stories from everybody. Like Eric Helms, for example, now was amazing with his contest prep. He was traveling, conferences, this and that. But I mean, from what I've heard, the first time around, he almost ruined his marriage because he was just turning into a not so nice person by the end of it. So yeah, that was a valuable learning experience. I don't know if you have any follow-up on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, the nice thing is it seems for the most part, and I guess maybe you don't hear about the ones who don't, but it seems like there is a general growth when any of the 3DMJ guys, you, me, like we tend to get better at it over time. And, that's, we won't get into this whole topic, but the whole thing of metabolic damage and people talking about, like you've ruined your metabolism. If that were true, each subsequent cut would get harder and harder. And yet most people, both physically but also mentally, seem to get better with subsequent cuts and subsequent contest preps. And I mean, obviously at some point age is going to be a factor from the physical standpoint, but mentally it seems like a lot of those guys have really gotten better at the process of dieting. And I'm sure that's something like when you do your next, quote unquote contest prep, when you get really lean, you'll do it even better than you did this past time.
Yeah, actually just this last time I met with my girlfriend for lunch. And she said, let's go to that place. Do you remember we had a fight there one time? I was like, fight? Like, when was that? And like, she mentioned the place like, oh, yeah, there we did have a fight. And what happened was, so that was right after my diet. And my plan was to, not to stay at 7% body fat, but to just take it like really slow. So maybe like go up by a percentage body fat a month at most or something. So maybe in like a year, I would be at whatever, maybe 12% body fat. So I really wanted to take it slow. And that's when it dawned on me at the end of the diet that, all these people around me, especially my girlfriend, was waiting for her boyfriend to return to normal, right? And then for me, and then I realized like what my idea actually meant in practice, which is the diet is not over. Okay, it was like 3-4 months, but now there is another, God knows how many months until I will be somewhat functional. And I was like so not present. I was like always thinking about that, like, man, can I really do this? And then my girlfriend started this conversation at this dinner, like, hey, so you're kind of distant. I don't know, like, it seems like you're just trying to get through the times we spent together as efficiently as possible. And I almost had this like nervous breakdown of like how difficult this whole thing is for me. And I'm just trying to avoid people and I'm really trying my best. Can she see that and whatever? And yeah, that was, I think, the lowest low that I hit throughout this whole thing when basically it was when it all culminated in my head, and that's when I kind of made the call that no, I just cannot do this. Like, I have to speed this process up. I need to gain fat quicker. But I can promise to everybody and to myself, the next time I get really lean, I will try to take it slower. Yeah, man. But I think it was a good note to end on, what you mentioned about enjoying the process and having a bit of a longer term view on this, and trying to act like as if you're coming from the future. And it's tough. It's a skill to learn for people. But I think if anybody can pull that off, I think they will be much better off. So I think that's a good point to end on. Yeah. So yeah, just mention where people can find you as usual.
Yeah, I mean, people probably know at this point, but Brains and Gains on YouTube and on Instagram, it is Dave_Maconi. Website is drdavemaconi.com.